So the Michelin Road 5 Sport Touring tyres with all of their super duper water siping, moisture pumping, carbon black road gripping wondrousness have been on my bike for about 5,000 kilometers now. And in that time I've ridden down to the Weserbergland twice, which is about 2.5 hours away from where I live here in Hamburg. Both times in mostly pretty good weather, pretty warm temperatures. But the big test was when I rode all the way down to Switzerland and back just last month. A grand total of about 4,000 kilometers. And we had pretty much every variety of summertime weather you could possibly hope for. Glorious warm sunny days. And we also had horrible disgusting wet days where there was so much moisture we might as well have just been riding through a swimming pool. And I'm going to cut really quickly to the chase here and just say, overall, I am utterly astounded by these tyres. I've been nothing but impressed from the very second they got on the bike. On the way down to Switzerland, I met up with my good motovlogging chum Smokey Bar, just short of the Schwarzwald, the Black Forest in Germany. And our plan was to ride from one end of the B500 all the way through the Black Forest to the other end of the B500, where it crosses over into Switzerland at the border at Koblenz and Waldshut. Now that's a good plan. The B500 is a great road to ride, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who hasn't tried it out. The part, of course, that we didn't plan was that it rained pretty much from start to end for the entire Black Forest section. I mean, I have to be honest, pretty much every time I've been to the Black Forest it's rained. It just seems to be a very moist place. But I will gladly hold up my hands and say that I have never ridden like that in the wet before. I mean, I was braking hard into corners, accelerating through them, leaning off the bike, chopping across apexes, and never once did the tyre slip, lose traction, give me any nasty surprises. I was just astonished by the amount of confidence that I had, despite the fact that the road was so wet. It was smooth and shiny like a marble chopping board. I mean, as you can see from the clips of the videos that I've got from that ride, the amount of water that the tyre is dispersing and that incredibly almost dry looking line that it's leaving behind me is just amazing. It shows me without a shadow of a doubt that the technology works. It must work, because I couldn't have ridden like that otherwise. It got to the point, and I've never said this before in my life because I've never believed it, but I was enjoying the riding, and I was enjoying pushing it harder, pushing it faster into every bend. And as I said, I never did find the limit of the tyres. I never did find the point at which they slipped or they stopped having any grip to give. But that's not to say I'm the fastest rider in the world. I was nowhere near dragging any knees on the floor in the wet. I haven't even done it in the dry, for dog's sake. But the fact that the limit of how hard I could push the bike was me and not the tyres says a lot. One of the things that Michelin talks a lot in their press material about these tyres is the decreased braking distances in the wet. And through no design of my own, I actually managed to test those claims out quite conclusively, as there was one bit when we were approaching a bunch of roadworks. The road was soaking wet, and this plonker in a silver Volkswagen decided he needed to be in front of me without really checking to see if there was enough space in front of me for that to be possible. So he pulled out, and I absolutely smashed my brakes on. I mean, I grabbed a full-on fistful of breakage, and the tyres just dug in despite the moisture. Tell you what though, braking, these tyres are pretty tasty. And if you bear in mind the fact that this bike has absolutely zero ABS, I will happily admit I probably grabbed too much brakes for those conditions. But the tyres made up the difference in my failure of judgment and my failure in skill, and provided more than enough traction to stop the bike and stop me before I managed to make an AndyManCam shaped imprint in the side of that Volkswagen. I should put some context into this and tell you the tyres that I had before. On the back I had a Metzeler M7RR, which is a super sticky, more sports oriented tyre, but which is known to have pretty good performance in the wet. And on the front I had a Metzeler M5. I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit that the tyres were on the bike when I bought it, and because they looked similar I assumed the one on the front was also an M7, but there were many times where I had some very sketchy moments in the wet, just finding the limits of traction and getting a proper wobble in the bend. But that leads me to my next point. That back tyre, that M7RR, was super sticky to the point where I never managed to spin the wheel up, except for once when it was about -2 degrees and there was obviously a bit of frost on the ground. But the problem was, after 5,000 kilometers, about the same distance I've travelled on these tyres, that tyre was just about finished. I mean, that tyre wore out so quick. The only reason I managed to get back to the UK for a little trip this year was because I went on the back of Bulldog Gaz's trailer. If I'd have ridden the 1,000 kilometers that it takes to get from my place place back to the UK, the tyre would have been bald when I got there. And if we pull up in a second and see how these tyres look after 5,000 kilometres, I think you're going to be impressed. I know for a fact that I am. So after the incredible wetness of the Black Forest, luckily conditions improved and we had some glorious sunny days. And astoundingly, I was scraping my toe sliders all over the place. Didn't get any knee down action. As I said, that's not something I've managed to achieve yet. But still, I was tonking it through the corners and never once did I feel like the tyre was on the edge. And in fact, this is the only time I think I will announce this. I didn't even get to the edge of the tyres, so they've got so much more to give. Again, the limit of how hard I could push the tyres, how hard I could push the bike, was me and not the equipment. Now on my last bike, the Kawasaki Versys 650, when I bought it, it had Michelin Road 3s on it, which I thought, unsurprisingly, in the wet, were absolutely brilliant. When I was riding the bike in the dry, I always felt like the tyres felt a little bit squirrely, like they were moving a bit too much, which I, in all of my expertise, I'm going to put down to there being too much flex in the tread, because all of that sight pattern, all of those cuts, those grooves, those wells, those holes, it seemed to me that they gave the rubber the ability just to move a little bit more than I was happy with, which just meant that riding in the wet they were great, but riding in the dry I never really felt like I could push the bike as hard as I wanted to. And that feeling for me has been 1,000 miles over the horizon with these tyres. And I'll happily admit, I wasn't hanging about. I was accelerating hard out of all of the bends, which again is testament to the incredible wear characteristics of these tyres. I mean, I was smashing, let's be realistic, 130 odd horsepower through the back tyre over and over and over again for about 3,000 kilometres. Yet the tyres aren't even starting to square off yet. It's voodoo, I tell you. It is just pure voodoo. And the carbon black compound rubber stuff on the shoulders of these tyres, that is a special kind of magic. Every time I was leant right over in a turn, the levels of confidence that I had were like I've never known it. And when the bike is right over on the shoulder of the tyre, it just felt so stable, so planted. So again, a lot of this magical do trickery that they've involved with these tyres, it's obviously doing something good. I mean, I liked this bike already, but since I've had these boots on, I like it a whole lot more. And it's given me the confidence to ride just that little bit faster, but without feeling like I'm being dangerous or out of control at any point. Well, I hear many of you asking, what about this whole 190 50/17 versus 190 55/17 nonsense? And for those of you who haven't seen the first video or missed this section, the standard size tyres for this bike are 190 50/17s. But Michelin actually gave me a set of 190 55/17s, which means that the height of the tyre is 55% of the width rather than 50% of the width. And the effect of that is that the profile of the tyre is a slightly different shape. The tyre itself is much taller, and it means that the bike has a much easier tip in into the corners and a much more agile feeling to it, or so the theory goes. And I have to admit, the reality 100% ties up with the theory. The speed with which I was able to just flick the bike into the bends and incredibly quickly just change direction was so impressive, and it just completely brings the bike to life. Because although sprightlier than many, this bike is, well, there's no denying, a little long in the tooth. It's a 2006 model, so it's a little bit heavier, it's a little bit less sprightly than the current crop of naked bikes. But in spite of all that, I was flicking it from left to right in the S-bends and the switchbacks faster than I have ever done on any bike in my entire life. And I've been riding for 14 years now, ladies and gents. But yeah, it just transformed the bike. I mean, some of the credit for that has to be laid at the feet of the higher profile of the back tyre, because of course what that's done is actually raised up the back of the bike very slightly, and to a minute degree altered the geometry of the bike. The effect of having that taller tyre on the back was such that when I put the bike onto the centre stand after I'd had the tyres fitted, the back tyre was only just off the ground, whereas before there used to be a lot more air between the tyres and the floor. Oh dear, it looks like we might very well be getting a repeat of the wet weather test as well, unfortunately. Well, it was sunny this morning, but ultimately, in summary, I can only say that I am 100% totally unequivocally happy with these Michelin Road 5s. They are using some kind of incredible rubber witchcraft to get the amount of grip out of these boots that I've been getting in the conditions that I've been getting it. And of course no review is complete without the downsides, without the negatives. Well, they're pretty hard to find so far, I'm afraid. I mean, yes, you could argue these tyres are quite pricey. They are certainly at the upper end of the sports touring tyre pricing scale. I know that I sound like a greasy car salesman when I say this, but I would have to argue that you get what you pay for. I mean, it's definitely seeming that way to me. That said, I should of course remind you that Michelin gave me these tyres, but I promise you, my opinions have not been paid for. And if I thought they were rubbish, I'd tell you they were rubbish. The other negatives, well, for me, there just aren't any. I just can't think of anything other than the price, which ultimately, if you think about it, considering I've done 5,000 kilometers and I'm probably a third to a half of the way through the tyres, so I'm going to be getting 10 to 15,000 out of these tyres. And yes, another set of Metzeler M7 RRs would have been less money, but I'd have had to buy 3 times as many tyres for them to last as long. And I haven't had any less fun with these tyres on than I did with the Metzelers. In fact, I think I'd go so far as to say I've had a lot more. So yeah, as far as negatives go, other than the fact that they are still wearing out and eventually one day they're going to need replacing, can't really think of any. I have just been impressed over and over and over with them. I really have. So there you go. That's my gushing finish, just as the sky begins its gushing upon me. And that is my 5,000 kilometer update of the Michelin Road 5 Sport Touring tyres. And just in case you hadn't got it already, because I do tend to be quite cryptic and subtle with these things, I quite like these tyres. So massive, huge thanks once again to Michelin, first of all, for just transforming my riding experience and vastly increasing my potential to enjoy the riding despite horrendous weather on the recent trip to Switzerland. But also thanks just for bringing these tyres into the world. It's just amazing to me that in this day and age, after so many advancements in tyre technology and tyre performance, that a new model can just leap forward as much as it seems like this tyre has. And the thing I'm really looking forward to is seeing what they do next. How good a tyre's going to get. Eventually they're going to have suction cups and hair dryers built in or something. So there you go, that is the end of that. Thank you so very much for watching. It would make my day if you could like this video if you enjoyed it, dislike it if you didn't enjoy it, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and most of all, I hope it was useful for you. So watch out for the next installment of this Michelin Road 5 review series, somewhere nearer to the end of their life. See how they're getting on when they're a bit longer in the tooth. But with the way they're wearing so far, I think that's going to be next year at this rate. And also keep an eye out for the Switzerland Tour Series videos, both mine and Smoky Bar's, as they come out over the coming weeks. First couple are out already, the next will be coming out throughout the winter season, I imagine. It was a lot of fun and I'm really looking forward to showing you guys what we got up to. Anyway, that's it. Till next time, keep them shiny and I will see you out there. Ta-ra!